These veterans brought home a million dreams. Dreams of full partnership in our nation. Dreams of a place where families would be accepted as equals. Dreams of a permanent place at the American table of citizenship. They changed a nation, obtained statehood for Hawaii, inspired leadership in business, education, the sciences, and politics. Amongst the veterans was a giant of humanity, Spark Masayuki Matsunaga, an advocate for equality and a defender for justice and freedom. He was a hero on the battlefield, and he was a champion for justice in the halls of Congress. His improbable journey began in poverty in Kauai. Born to immigrant plantation workers, he received the nickname Sparky from a cartoon character.
December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, he served as an original member of the famed 100th Infantry Battalion.
It was very, very common for them not to speak about their military service. My dad was wounded twice.
Tripped a landmine, and it wounded Sparky very badly. So he spent a year recuperating.
He was awarded the Bronze Star and 2 Purple Heart medals. He would go on to serve as a company commander in the Military Intelligence Service. After the war, Sparky earned a degree from Harvard Law School.
He was always told, Sparky, the best way to effectuate social change is to go into politics.
In 1954, Sparky was elected to the state legislature,
Hawaii bids farewell to 40 years of frustration,
where he helped Hawaii win statehood. He was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1962 and was re-elected 6 times.
He counted the stars on the ceiling of the House of Representatives, and he noticed that there were 48, not 50. So he repeatedly told the Speaker, "Can you do something about that?"
Spark was elected to the U.S. Senate in 1976.
Watching his close friends die during battle really pushed him to do everything possible to fight for peace.
One of his greatest legislative achievements was single-handedly garnering a veto-proof number for the Civil Liberties Act.
Members who didn't even care about this issue signed on. You know why? They absolutely love Spark Matsunaga.
The guard up in the watchtower fired the machine gun, killing the elderly man instantly. His grandson. And members of his family still bear the scars of that incident.
Sparky modestly confessed to his friend and colleague, Senator Dan Inoue, "I want to be remembered as a friend of peacemakers, a friend of the veterans, because if not for them, we would not be enjoying the fruits of democracy. Okage-sama de. Because of Spark Matsunaga, we are who we are today."
Matt Matsunaga, for being here with us today. Really appreciate your time to honor the legacy of your late father, the late Senator Matsunaga, Sparky Matsunaga. We'll get started with some questions today. How has the story of the late Senator Matsunaga impacted your family?
My father left us an amazing legacy gift, and that is a commitment to public service. I remember him telling us that public service is an honorable profession, and a commitment to how he lived his life with fairness, with peace, and with justice. And those are the gifts that he has left, not just my immediate family, but my extended ohana and fortunately, the people of this great state too. His story too is just an amazing story, and how he overcame abject poverty as a kid, walking door to door selling tofu with a pet pig named Poro, and rising to the halls of the United States Senate. It's just a terrific story that is still inspiring every time I hear it.
Thank you so much. What do you take from the late senator's memory that has influenced you today?
It's funny because no matter how much times have changed, many of the themes that he focused on as a legislator are still applicable today. He focused on racial inequality, and look, today we still have those issues. He focused on renewable energy, and now we're faced with climate crisis. So what's amazing to me is that even though years have changed, times have changed, many of the issues that have been at the core of his beliefs are still ripe for addressing today. And he has had some impactful legislation that still influences all of us today. I mean, look at the legislation on peace, look at his legislation on renewable energy, on the poet laureate, on reparations for those harmed by our government. It's still memories that continue to influence us today.
Thank you. If you could say anything to the late senator, your dad, what would it be today?
I think I would tell him how much we miss him still, and we wish he had taken care of his health a little better, and perhaps he would have been around a little bit longer, and he could have seen his granddaughters grow up, and I think he would be so proud of them. One is following in his footsteps and doing law and is focused on public interest, and one is in med school, and actually her summer project is focusing how to get needed prescription medication to those in need, those who are impoverished, those who can't afford prescription medication. So that's her summer project at Dartmouth Med School.
Thank you. That is quite the summer project, and those are quite the steps, and that's amazing. And thank you. If you could spend a day with your dad, the late senator, what would you do?
I'd like to actually spend 2 days. One would be Sundays were family days, and Sundays were the only days that he actually stayed home and didn't go into the office. And we'd spend Sundays in the family room, whether watching football games or just watching TV, and he'd be doing work from his chair, and my mom would be bringing us snacks, and we'd have family dinner Sunday evenings, and we could listen to his many stories. But actually, I'd really like to follow him during one of his days as a U.S. Senator. I mean, if you listen to the stories, and his nickname was Senator Stamina, I don't know how he got through his 16-hour days without drinking energy drinks or coffee. It was just amazing. I mean, he did drink green tea, and I suppose that has some energy impact on him, but boy, I don't know how he got through every day like that. I certainly can't. And I would love to kind of follow him to see how he approached his legislative responsibilities. He used to have oftentimes 2 lunches a day with constituents from Hawaii who came 5,000 miles to dine in the Senate dining room with him, and how he would work his persuasive magic with his colleagues, generally, going one-on-one, talking to his colleagues. I mean, it's amazing that, for example, for the establishment of the Peace Institute, how he was able to gather so many signatures in advance of introduction. And when he first started, it was, oh, Sparky, that's a really good idea, but I can't put my signature on that bill. I got reelection next year, you know, and how it turned from that to now peace is really cool, you know, and popular to support. So that's how I'd like to follow him around one day and see how he worked.
Thank you. Definitely 2 days are needed was definitely. What lessons do you hope to share with our youth community as it relates to the stories you shared today?
I think for my father, following your passion was very important to him. And I think from when he was a very young boy, talking about wanting to be a United States Senator before Hawaii was even a state, and getting the education necessary to help him succeed in that arena were just really important factors in his life and in our family's life. And I think very important messages to our community. Education is really the best way to learn what you're good at and to figure out how you can help shape and define and better our community. I mean, that's the core of it. I remember when I was working as a CPA for a couple of years, and my dad having that talk with me about, do you want to go to law school or do you want to be a CPA for the rest of your life? Because if you go to law school, you can learn about our laws and learn how to help change our laws for the betterment of our society. And so that was a very defining moment in my life.
Thank you so much, Matt. I just thank you for all those insightful stories, and just for that will continue to guide us, not only you, but definitely the larger community as a whole. And it's quite the legacy that he's left behind. So thank you so much for your time. So much for being here with us today, Aaron Matsunaga. We'll get started. So how has the story of the late senator impacted your family?
Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for having me. The impact is actually multi-generational in my family. My grandmother who raised me, we grew up across the street from Senator's sister. And we would always have to go over with flowers because Auntie Dorothy had fruit. And we always knew that Sparky was doing this important work in Washington, D.C. And so we would, whenever the call came in, my grandparents would go down and help. And to this day, my grandparents still have the menu when they went to DC in the, I would say probably early 70s, that he actually signed for them, because apparently he had 2 lunches a day for his constituents. And when I talked to Brian Schatz, he said, Senator Schatz, he said that in the main dining table downstairs for senators only, there's this really huge table and there's a plaque on it and it says Sparky Matsunaga, because he had so many lunches. And my cousins, when we get together, you know, they pull out napkins when they were in high school marching band and in DC and all these different things. So his legacy is really permeated 3 or 4 generations of my family in Hawaii. And it's always been such a wonder to hear what people still say. If Matt and I go around, they're just like, are you the son? And, you know, it matters to them. They want to thank him. They want to thank his dad. And, you know, yes, you and I know we live with the legacy. You and I work together a lot on it. And it's really important to our family because time passes and, you know, we don't want people to forget the lessons learned, right? The past, the future, our kids. So that's how I look at it in terms of just trying to be a better person think about other people, be just, be peaceful, and just do the right thing.
Thank you so much. What do you take from the late senator's memory that has influenced you today? You kind of alluded to it a little bit, but.
I did. I think in generations up to mine, were my grandmother, my parents, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins. He still is extremely alive in their life. He made an impact when he was alive. He made an impact not only with his wonderful legislation on the Peace Institute and doing things with the Poet Laureate and renewable energy, but he touched their lives. He was there for them. He made sure he just greeted them and just made sure that they felt welcome in DC. And back in that time, you know, it was hard to get to DC. It'd take maybe like 14, 20 hours, you know, doing all kinds of stuff. But he just made them feel when they walked into that building, they were one of him. And Hawaii was recognized. And we were pretty much still a new state back then.
Thank you. If you could say anything to the late senator today, what would it be?
You're missed, and not only by the people of Hawaii, but by his family. And you did so much work, and your work is not forgotten, and it will never be forgotten. And honestly, there are times when people tell me they wish he were still here. We need a Sparky again.
Thank you. If you could spend a day with the late senator, what would you do?
I would ask him, you know, what kept him going? You know, he had moved his whole family to DC, which is a true endeavor, trying to fit in as an AAPI community back when, you know, there weren't very many. And Hawaii was full of Asians, and he just went from that to there. And yet he got things done, and he never gave up. So I would want to ask him, how was it when you went up there? Did you manage to be such a phenomenal representative of our state while managing your 5 kids, your wife, your constituents that would come twice a week? And not only that, but I would ask him, you know, I hope it was worth your while, because it certainly was from our perspective.
Thank you so much. What lessons
Sorry.
do you?
I should get non-running mascara.
What lessons do you hope to share with our youth community as it relates to the stories you shared today?
I feel extremely strong about the work that he did and the impact it has today, whether it be the Matsunaga Institute of Peace, whether it be the Veterans Association, whether it be his phenomenal ideas on renewable energy that are coming to fruition today. And more importantly, I think I want people to know his dedication, his love of Hawaii, and his love of public service. And that needs to come back. It needs to come back not only to Hawaii, it needs to come back to our nation. And I just really, that is really important to me too. In my heart, he is a role model of how an elected official should be, no matter what state you're from, but especially Hawaii. You should be a Sparky.
Alton Takayama Chung is here with us today. Thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciate you and everything you do for our community. And thank you so much for being part of our Voices of Humility Talks Story event.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Our first question today will be, how has the story of the late Senator Sparkin Matsunaga impacted your family?
Well, Spark Matsunaga was, of my parents' generation, Nisei, second generation Japanese Americans. And he was like one of my parents' heroes. I mean, everyone, as far as I know, everyone in the community looked up to him. I mean, he was from the plantations. So, the humble beginnings. It's about everybody in Hawaii has some kind of connection to the plantations. He was with the 100th Battalion, 442nd Regimental Combat Team, the all Japanese American unit that fought in Europe. And growing up, these men who went across, halfway around the world to go and fight for the United States during a time of intense discrimination, these guys were looked upon with awe and respect. They were like gods when I was growing up. And he went to University of Hawaii. So, going to university, come from the plantations, is a very big thing. And then he went on to Harvard Law School. He went to the mainland, to the top law school at the time. And then he also served in the territorial government, went on to become a U.S. representative. That's a big deal. And he stayed for like 7 terms, something like that, as a representative. And then he went on to the Senate and spent like 6 or 7 terms there. So, he was like the epitome of a success story. And, everyone kind of pointed to him saying, this is possible. Look what this guy was able to do. That's inspiration for an entire generation of people, like my parents' generation. So that was a real big impact for them and passed on to us.
Thank you. What do you take from the late senator's memory that really influenced you today? Especially that you have a certain special connection based on your work as a storyteller too. So,
I spent months researching the late senator to go and create that piece, and I think that what really impressed me was his passion for whatever cause he believed in, and his integrity, incredible integrity, and tenacity. He spent, sometimes 20 years or so to go and putting a bill every year, just trying to get it passed, and finally succeeding in several counts. And his compassion for others. Again, all these values that were passed on through his generation, to my generation, these things that I hold on to and I kind of look upon, and again, as a real example of what is possible. Another thing that really struck me was, this whole comparison to him as being, a workhorse versus a show horse. A workhorse person, just does the work and keeps his head down, just does the work and is very quiet and humble about it, as opposed to a show horse who runs around saying, "Hey, look at me," and gets elevated up in public. He was a real behind the scenes guy. And again, that's maybe a very Japanese thing to do, to always, because he was the junior senator, okay, always, respecting the senior person there, holding them up, helping them whenever you can, and doing your work and getting your work done. Granted, he was a workaholic, and he had his flaws, and many times he had to put his duty to country before his family, and it was really hard on them. As a workaholic myself, I can, I know that siren call of work, and but through him, I can also see the pitfalls of what can be not so good about that. Another thing that really struck me was that he may not have agreed with everything that other people were saying, especially as political opponents and things like that, but the fact that he was able to work with them and gain their support across party lines, which, back then, that was how he got things done. I mean, he'd have a fight with you, but as he said, I think one person said, there's no blood on the floor, there are no bodies there. Everyone said, yes, we agree, and we're still friends. In this current political climate, that gives me hope that maybe one day that can happen again. The fact that he was able to go and again, get things done, and in the spirit of compromise. That really inspires me to say that, that there is hope that we can get back to that place again.
Thank you. If you could say anything to the late senator today, what would it be?
I think I would just like to thank him for all that he did for Japanese Americans, with the redress bill, spearheading it through the Senate, and to all the things he did for Japanese Americans or Asians across the country, as well as the things that he brought for Hawaii and the country. He paved the way for much of the respect that minorities have today, but there's still so much more that needs to be done. But he really took it to heart and never forgot where he came from, and the concerns about the people, that in his district, in the state of Hawaii, and always bringing those forth, and that never forgetting that those things that he grew up with and shaped and molded him. I think I also want to thank him for his service and his sacrifice and his insight into global problems. I mean, he foresaw the energy crisis, 20 years before the Gulf War. And he warned about these things, and he saw all of these problems, and he took steps to put things in place to address these future problems, like the Peace Institute, like and cooperation in space. Incredible insight, and having the wherewithal to see the issues, foresee what's going on, and then to take steps to go and maybe not have the answers right away, but to put things in place that maybe can continue to work forward and make progress on these problems. That is incredible. And I'll just go and thank him for all that.
Thank you. If you could spend a day with the late senator, what would you do?
After reading all about what he did, I would like to go and take a tour of the Capitol with him and have lunch with him in the Senate dining room and just listen to his stories. I'd like to know and have a real deep conversation with him about, what regrets did he have? What in his opinion was left undone? And and just trying to understand, how did he even foresee, back in, the 90s, well, actually probably the late 80s, that there's going to be a war about oil? How did he know that? What kind of insights did he have of these things? And I also would like to go and ask him, assuming that he has knowledge of what has happened since his passing, what does he think about what's going on in the country today? What would he be thinking? What would he be saying about it? What is his feelings about that? And then I would like to ask him, does he have any word of advice for us? What can we do? Where should we focus? I mean, there's just so many things going on in this world. I know that we start focusing on all the problems and issues going on. It's really easy to get depressed because there's just so many things. And I would like to ask him, even in his time, there were a lot of issues going on. What kind of insights could he have? What words of advice? How could we survive or persevere through all these turmoils that we're seeing right now? This is a touchstone to give me hope, saying, times are hard now. Times were hard back then. We got through them. What can we do now? What do we do now? How do we focus? How do we keep our center?
Thank you. What lessons do you hope to share with our youth community as it relates to the stories you shared today?
I put myself back as when I was a kid and say, what can I possibly learn from this guy who was dead before I was even born? In my opinion, to really address the problems of the future, you really need to understand where you come from and upon whose shoulders you stand. It's easy to take for granted, not even think about, the freedoms and opportunities we have today. It wasn't always like that. And to have perspective, to see, and gratitude for what we have today and what kinds of things we need to look forward in the future. I mean, they say that, those who do not study the past are doomed to repeat the same mistakes of the past. And granted, when today's young people become tomorrow's leaders, they're going to be confronted with new situations and new issues, things they've never seen before, things that we've never seen before. How would they navigate through all those things? And it reminds me of a story from World War II, when the 100th Battalion, 442nd boys were shipped from a lot of them from internment camps, but also a lot of them from Hawaii. They got shipped to Europe. They've never been to Europe. And they're confronted with situations they've never seen before. They don't know how to even react to these things. These are young men, 18, 19, 20 years old. And when I was talking to one of the old timers, he said, a lot of them went to Japanese school, Japanese language school. And they had a class which essentially translates to ethics. And what they did is they told stories of Japanese heroes and great deeds and things like that. And these young Japanese American soldiers in Europe, not knowing what to do or how to behave, they look back upon those stories of these heroes, of these Japanese heroes, and how they carried themselves. And they decided that's how we're going to carry ourselves too. We don't know any better. We don't know what else to do. But these stories at least show us the way of how these people behaved, and we're going to carry ourselves in those same way. So I would ask, or I would suggest for future generations, younger men right now, young women, men and women listen to this story now, that you can look at, the senator as a more modern day, closer hero. How did he behave? And look upon, your parents and your grandparents and aunts, uncles, cousins, your family. How do they behave? What is it that, the values that are passed on, these people have held up as, this is how these people behaved. And this was good things, these are not so good things. Take the good things and say, okay, in the future, I'm going to be confronted with things that no one has ever seen before. How do I conduct myself? How do I carry myself? And look back upon these things that these people who epitomize the values and traditions of past generations and build upon that and take from them the learnings, take the good stuff that they learn from it, see if they can apply it to these future problems. You may not have all the answers, but at least you have a way, a guidepost of how to act, how to conduct yourself, and to move on with respect and gratitude.
Thank you so much for everything you shared with us today.
Well, thanks for asking the questions.
It's great to reconnect with you after your wonderful performance and tribute really you did to the senator a couple years ago. I've experienced it quite a couple times, and it's always a treat. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for asking. And again, I hope this was helpful for people. To me, that's the whole reason why I do this stuff, is because people learn differently, right? And not everyone can sit in front of a book and read and imagine these stories. Yep. Some people, visual learners or auditory learners, some tactile. Yeah. But yeah, this is just presenting history in a way that another modality that people can take in. And like I said, there's something special about the story, and the way that that it was crafted and the way that I portrayed it. I mean, when the late senator's son saw me perform it for the first time, he was really shaken, because he said that when I began quoting the senator, he could have sworn his father was standing on stage, and that just shook his world, knocked me for a loop too. I said, okay, I've done my work to the point where, yes, I've researched, I've embodied this character. Maybe I'm channeling him. I don't know. But that to me was like, wow, okay, very touching, very moving. And kind of spooky. But the fact that the senator's words have that much power, and they're continuing on, and for someone who knew the senator that well to say yes, these those words still echo, that they still ring true, that to me, that's incredible.